Welcome to today's podcast, Pro Bono Profiles, where we get into conversation with iProbono's panel lawyers for their insights into pro bono lawyering and their motivation to incorporate pro bono work in their practice. In this season, we will feature lawyers working with us in Sri Lanka. We have with us today attorney at law Jerusha Crosette-Thambiah to speak on her work with sexual and gender-based violence and LGBT plus issues. Jerusha has an illustrious career spanning over 13 years in the civil and quasi-criminal courts, in family law, sexual and gender-based violence, and commercial arbitrations. She is also a lecturer on tort law and family law at the Center for Professional Studies. Jerusha also played a pivotal role as a trainer in iProbono's Access to Justice program in 2021 and 2023. I am Shevindri Manuel, iProbono's program manager in Sri Lanka, and I will walk you through this conversation. Jerusha, we extend our heartfelt gratitude for being here today. To start off, can you tell us a little about how you got into pro bono work?
Hi Shavindri, thank you for having me. So when we look at pro bono work, I think what I always knew, I witnessed and I saw violence mainly against women, but I knew that when I become a lawyer, I'd always want to stand with those who needed some kind of support or who didn't have a voice. So there is two reasons why I took to pro bono work. One thing is that my passion for this kind of work took me into cases of family law and gender-based violence, and so those survivors sometimes couldn't afford general court fees, and the cause was bigger than the fee itself, so I took on a lot of work that was pro bono from an early stage. And the other is that my first and my current senior, who is a president's counsel, himself was a person who was very much about pro bono work. He himself got into the practice to help legal aid kind of clients who he thought never had a good chance at quality litigation. So having learned from him and being trained by him very naturally then made me a person who did at least a percentage of my work pro bono.
Thank you for that, Jerusha. You work with a lot of victims of violence, such as women, the LGBT plus community, and children. Can you tell us about how you started working with these victims?
Women and children, I started early on because I always had a passion to stand up for them, and I always thought that they didn't have the kind of push to have an equal opportunity at justice when it came to actual legal matters. But the LGBT community was through the work I did with sex workers, and a large part of the population of sex workers were these LGBT sex workers who were treated worse off than any other sex workers. iProbono also sent me cases of LGBT persons, and I'm happy to say that I had one of the matters where I was able to openly state that my client was from the community and gain a protection order in a case which is probably the first of its kind because Sri Lanka comes from a history of criminalization of this community.
What do you feel are the immediate challenges faced by the LGBT persons on their right to access to justice before the courts? And what do you think should be implemented as change?
Country itself for so long has treated them as some kind of criminals, and that is very deeply etched in the community's minds. So I would say the decriminalization, working away the kind of discrimination they suffer, working on the stigma and working on inclusion, acceptance and awareness is what we really need to work on first, because then this community will have an actual foot to stand on and an equal space in a justice forum, the Temple of Justice.
Other than your work with victims, you are also a lecturer and a trainer. You have trained 2 cohorts of the iProbono's Access to Justice program on handling violence against women. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and what your key learnings are, what you believe young lawyers should have in terms of expertise and experience?
I got to train one of the key stakeholders, the police. And as much as I've always been on the other side of things and I've written papers about how ineffective they are some of the time, I was really sort of surprised to know about how inundated and how difficult their work is, and how much of an understanding they too carry about certain communities where even though we are used to feminist lawyering, some communities need to be dealt with differently, because taking away of a father figure from a home could mean a very risky situation for the rest of the family in terms of domestic violence, etc. So I learned a lot from them and I saw where they come from. and we learn how to be allies to each other instead of always see each other as enemies. iProbono work is a fine balance. You work with survivors, so you need to be very good with the law. You need to treat this as any high paying case. Your system has to be, and your research has to be on point, and you have to do your best. All that while you're doing your best, you also have to be more understanding and sensitive, as they are survivors of violence. Treat them with dignity and respect at all times. But remember at the same time that you are an officer of court, and your ethics also have a part to play. Fine balance is something that sometimes we are unable to get right, but it's of utmost importance.
Thank you so much for having this conversation. It has been a very enlightening discussion. Join us on the next episode with Ishara De Silva, iProbono's panel lawyer in Sri Lanka, as he discusses his work with the LGBT community as a transgender lawyer. See you next time.